welcome to the Courtney Turner podcast. My guests today are Aaron Day and Craig Wenclewicz. They have been guests before, so they are returning, and we are going to discuss what I think is an incredibly urgent and really important topic. We are going to be discussing the tokenization of everything, it looks like. And Craig, of course, has a background in the financial markets, which is highly relevant. It looks like they are really trying to push things towards the digital currency. We just recently had the Clarity Act, the Stable Act, and the Genius Act, and we will get into more detail on what that is for those who might not be familiar. I had recently done a whole thread kind of outlining them. They are moving forward. I think the Clarity Act was actually just passed through Congress, so it looks like this is shaping up to try and steer everybody towards the digital currency. Aaron Day has been working very hard on certainly bringing this information to the forefront, and also working on technologies that are in the digital space that are truly private. And that is very rare because that is a buzzword. I know I've warned a lot of my audience, both through my articles as well as through these podcasts, that they use the buzzword decentralization, digital sovereignty. These are marketing terms. This is really not what is actually taking place, and we know that because they keep saying how it's interoperable. Even Balaji Srinivasan says it's decentralized towards a re-centralized center. So they really do tell you what it is all about. It is about creating a nexus that is more centralized, even more centralized than what we're experiencing currently with our fiat currency. And tokenization, once they start, currently they're the whole MAHA to MABA, right? It was Make America Healthy again. And that, I don't know how anybody could argue with that. Of course, we want that. But I warned people extensively, and I got quite a bit of pushback, and I really did want to be wrong. I really wanted to be wrong, that this was all about pushing the precision AI medicine. Now we see Project Stargate rolling out. We also see RFK talking about the wearables and how everybody should be wearing wearables. This is part of the Internet of Wearables that's tied to the Internet of Everything. And then he's also saying that MAHA is really MABA, which is Make America Biotech Accelerate. So he's literally putting the term accelerationism, right? Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment accelerationism into this MABA. And it's very concerning, just that alone. But once they start adding the component of the internet, the chips, right, the implantables, wearables are bad enough. But once you have implantables, and you have on top of that the Internet of Nanobio things, which does look like there's so much research and so much groundwork being laid to create this Internet of Nanobio things, and that lays the groundwork for tokenization that could be really just a tyranny that I don't think many people can possibly fathom. And it would be, technocracy wet dream. So not mine. I think this is very, very dystopian kind of a future. So we're going to bring these incredible gentlemen today to talk about what is unfolding, that, from their knowledge and from their expertise, and what it is we can do about it. And, I think really I keep pointing to this cognitive liberty that we need to exercise our free will. The whole purpose of this kind of a control grid is to create a noosphere, right? Teilhard de Chardin's vision of having everything connected in the intellectual sphere. And this is what Elon Musk talks about with the Neuralink, and how that will create this type of noosphere. Of course, Game B calls it collective intelligence. So we've got all these different names for these terms, but this is really the complete eradication of free will and cognitive sovereignty. But for right now, we still have cognitive sovereignty, and I think it is really urgent and imperative that we exercise it. So that's what we're going to get into today. I know, really cheery, uplifting stuff, but the cheery part is that we still have our free will. And for right now, I think it's really incumbent upon us to exercise it, to be aware of what these plans are and what the potential ramifications are. They have not laid the control grid yet. They're just setting things in motion. So it's very important that we're aware of what they're doing, what the potential ramifications are, and what we can do to, at the very least, push back and derail some of these plans. So without further ado, Aaron Day and Craig Wenclewicz, how are you doing today?
Great, Courtney.
Great. How are you?
Be back.
Doing well. Yeah, it's crazy times, crazy times. So I guess let's open it up with, both of you are coming at this from the more financial perspective. Obviously, Craig, you have the expertise in the markets, and Aaron, you have an expertise in the crypto sector, which seems to be where they're trying to move everything. Although, as I know all of us have been trying to warn people, they keep couching everything as being opposed to the CBDCs, and Trump did do his ban on central bank digital currencies, which is great. However, it now looks like they're ushering in other types of digital currencies that might have the same kind of result, although just under a different name. It kind of reminds me of the 15-minute cities, and then Trump came out with his freedom cities. And who could argue with a freedom city? I mean, who doesn't want to live in a freedom city? That sounds amazing. But when you start to look under the hood at what they actually means, it's really no different than these 15-minute cities, C40 cities, smart cities. Goes by all sorts of different names. I wrote an article, The Path to Mass Surveillance, and I outlined all of the different names and how, there's some nuanced differences, but for the most part, it's all a surveillance mechanism. So I don't know who wants to, maybe we'll start with you, Craig, what you're seeing with the markets and how does it tie into this? What are your big concerns?
Yeah, so typically what I've focused on in years past is a broad spectrum across what we would call futures markets or commodities markets. So we've formed a show that kind of goes through that same process where Mondays we look at currencies, Tuesday we look at debt, Wednesday we look at energy, Thursday we talk about, stock markets, and then Fridays we kind of wrap it all up with commodities. And what we're talking about here with these different, what we have are this adventure by the government to install these stable coins. And it ties in with all this stuff, okay? It's sort of a currency that's kind of pegged to the fiat currency, right? It also has a 1-to-1 ratio with the debt markets, right? The treasuries, short-term bills, long-term notes, right? Longer term. So short-term, we have bills, then we roll into 2-year to 5-year, 10-year notes, and then we get into longer stuff. We call those bonds. So there's a component to that to it. And then we get into this stuff too, where Bitcoin is actually went through this whole thing under the prior administration where they named it a commodity, okay? And so then it gets regulated by the CFTC. So now we have the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. We have the Securities Exchange Commission in here. And it creates a lot of confusion. So not only are we dealing with stable coins and we're dealing with this new form of currency that they're trying to roll out there, but we're also dealing with these sort of the older style that, the more, traditional, regulatory agencies that have their fingers nestled in this whole thing as well. And so the House and the Senate are voting on this as we speak. And Aaron can talk probably more about that. But from my perspective, what I'm watching the dollar to see what it does. I think the dollar can actually fail on the upside. So we hear all the time about how the dollar's weak. We've got so much debt. We've got so much money that's printed out there. And yet I think that there's actually a situation, and the dollar's hanging by a thread right now. I do a lot of work on the dollar, so I know it from a couple different angles, right? We do quantitative analysis on it. We do technical analysis on it. Harmonic analysis, which is something people may not have heard of, but we use these harmonic structures out there to monitor where the dollar is relative to things. And the reason the dollar matters, it still is the world reserve currency. And most transactions around the world, most businesses, most countries transact in the dollar. We've seen things like BRICS pop up and other things like that, some type of a competition for the US dollar. They've all failed, right? Because in the end, the dollar still has the biggest debt market, all those things we went back to, the currency, the debt, the commodities, and the people, right? The productivity of the people in the United States is so much more efficient there are a few that beat it in terms of productivity, but generally speaking, the US is so productive for a big economy relative to everyone else. Okay, so then we dial this back into that's why the dollar still remains the world reserve currency at this point. But what we're seeing is this cracking of this old infrastructure, and they're trying to nestle their way into this. And because we know there's so much debt, there's sovereign debt crises waiting all over the place. We know Japan holds a lot of debt, Europe holds a lot of debt, we hold a lot of debt. And it's a battle. I think we see the war drums beating too. So I think all this stuff ties together. Typically we're used to when things get out of control like this, they take us to war. This time, I think the war is different. It's a 5th-generation war. It's a 6th-generation war, and it really comes down to technology and what we can call technocracy, right? The not really. We don't want to confuse those two, technology, but also that what we're talking about here is taking that technology and turning into a form of governance called technocracy. And with that, hopefully that makes some sense.
Yes, it does. I will just, before I let you go, Aaron, I just wanted to mention that because you brought up BRICS, and there was a release from Lucius Trust. They were talking about, it's their like biannual newsletter, and they talked about the divine economy. And they were saying how BRICS represents this global shift towards a multipolar world. And so they're, interpreting this through the esoteric lens of how this is signaling the divine economy. And, they're basically supporting BRICS. So I thought that was very interesting. It's definitely telling of what they'd like to see, I think. So, but yeah. So, Aaron, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing and where things are going, and with your knowledge on the digital currencies and how they seem to be shifting everything towards that?
So the approach that I take with this, and what I view, since I've been following for a few years now directly, I've been using crypto since 2012, but I've been tracking the CBDC issue for 3 years, pretty much full time, is that the real battleground here now is technocracy versus freedom. This is the number one issue that we're dealing with. And what's at stake is actually free will itself, our ability to exercise our agency and make decisions for ourselves. I don't think that there's any multipolar world going on. I think right now we just have different flavors and different people promoting and using propaganda to push technocracy from different angles. You have Yuval Noah Harari doing this on the left. You have Curtis Yarvin, and I know you've talked about this at length, pushing it on the right. But in the end, technocracy is what we end up with. And so we end up with a situation where scientists and engineers are making decisions for us through a social credit system, and a digital currency is the mechanism for this. It's basically a form of money that can be programmed and tracked and censored by one or more third parties. Most of our money is already digital. However, there's more programmability as you start doing what's called tokenization, where you create a digital token that represents an asset, but where that digital token can be very finely tuned in terms of how it can be programmed and tied into other social credit-like systems. And it doesn't stop with just money. Literally, the plan for the technocrats is to tokenize every asset that we have, our stocks, our bonds, our mortgages, our cars. They literally want to regulate, if you look at it, UN Agenda 2030, the land, the air, and the sea. And the way that they're going to do that is through this technical process of tokenization. So in short, it's technocracy versus freedom, which is about free will. And the battleground here is actually tokenization and how tokenization happens. And so what I've been actively promoting and trying to build are decentralized private versions of tokenization, where each individual can actually have the tokens and trade any asset anywhere in the world without third parties and without the ability for centralized authorities to be able to even view your transactions. So it's complete privacy for all financial transactions. And I think that's really the battleground. But what's going on today is we have Crypto Week, and Crypto Week involves, they're trying to pass 3 bills: the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, and the Anti-CBDC Surveillance Act. Yep. What these 3 bills will do is essentially provide a backdoor BDC through stablecoins. And through the Clarity Act, they're going to create basically the legal mechanism for our stocks and bonds and commodities to all be tokenized with the same CBDC level surveillance. And they're wrapping it with a lot of propaganda and a lot of patriotic messaging, but this is exactly what's happening. We're going to end up with CBDC level surveillance, within the first year of this second Trump administration, faster than Klaus Schwab could do in 10 years.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't agree more. And I do think it's the battle for free will. And I think tokenization is exactly the mechanism. It's when you start talking about, things like, I know now we've got RFK, which I think was such a bait and switch, but I had warned that that's what they were going to do. But I think it was a really clever marketing and messaging because who could argue with Maha? Again, it's like freedom cities. I mean, you're going to argue with Make America Healthy again. But of course, now he's saying that really means MABA, which is Make America Biotech Accelerate, right? So he's literally using the term accelerationism like it's embedded in his new slogan. And when you start thinking about the Internet of Things, the Internet of Wearables, which he's telling everybody we need, then of course, the Internet of Nanobio things, and then you talk about tokenization on top of that, that's a tyranny unlike, I think, really just not something that most people can even fathom currently. That's really having control over our breath, our move, our purchasing power, every single facet of our existence. And you had mentioned the multipolarity. You don't think, I actually did a thread on this talking about how this was part of the Trilateral Commission's, propaganda to steer us towards technocracy. And they were pretty overt about it. They people like Brzezinski and Kissinger, who were part of the Trilateral Commission, they talked about using this multipolarity in order to steer us towards the technocracy, because then we would have that, the regional power blocks, like they were mapped out for the Club of Rome in 1973, their regionalization document, right? And it's also very reminiscent of what the Technocracy Inc. back in the 1930s had mapped out. And it does look like that's what this North American technate that Trump is trying to, acquire Greenland and Canada. It does look like he's laying out exactly the groundwork for what Technocracy Inc. had mapped out as being the technate. Which is really, really scary because I agree with you. This is the battle for free will. Can you talk a little bit more about, so with the tokenization, part of what they're encouraging, like the part of how they're selling this is that one, the two things that I keep hearing are that now it's going to be, you'll have fractionalized assets, and that this is, levels the playing field, makes things more accessible for people. So they're marketing this as something that takes power away from the elites, which of course it does exactly the opposite. But they're marketing it that way. And, the joke I always say, and I think both of you have heard me say it before, but is that we'd like to think that we could share assets with loved ones, but there's a reason estate lawyers exist, because that doesn't always work out so well. So I don't know how that's going to work out with complete strangers owning a fraction of a piece of artwork, for instance, or real estate. And that's one of the ways that they're trying to market this tokenization as being so beneficial. And then another thing I keep hearing is that it's truly decentralized. And I have been very skeptical of this term, decentralization, because it seems like it's kind of, even Balaji Srinivasan in his network state talks about a re-centralized center. So he's talking about the decentralization to move towards re-centralization, which is very reminiscent of what H.G. Wells talked about as the decentralization of the information institutions being the conduit to create the world brain. And the information institutions back then were the academic institutions and the media. But today, that's really the internet and technology. So could you clarify that? Because I know you're working on things, as you mentioned, that are truly privatized, but a lot of what they're selling as being decentralized and giving digital sovereignty might not be quite matching up with the marketing.
Sure. I guess what I'd like to say at first is, because a lot of people aren't aware of this, the reason tokenization matters is in some ways it's inevitable. All commerce runs today almost entirely on centralized databases. And so all transactions, whether it's money itself, the Federal Reserve runs on an Oracle database, your local bank uses a Microsoft or Oracle database. That is where the quote truth resides in terms of people, moving money around.
Yeah.
And there are problems with centralized databases. They're hacked, they're cyber attacks. I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars a year in economic loss.
Yeah.
Tokenization represents, in some ways, or could represent an improvement in the technology, because you're creating tokens that are on a blockchain that is immutable, where you can't go in and delete the transactions. No central authority has the ability to go in and control those. That is a theoretical case. That's the case that they're making when they're trying to claim that tokenization is a great idea and it's going to empower all of this ownership. The problem is that's not the form of tokenization they are implementing at all. That's not even the form of tokenization that we have with the popular stablecoins right now, Tether and USDC. These are already developed and programmed in a way where they can be tracked and seized. So Tether and USDC can already be tracked and seized. Yeah. Now, because of this legislation, they're going to be put under the control of the United States Congress. So we're going to get all of the financial surveillance that we have today under the Bank Secrecy Act and Patriot Act and some of the other laws. And it's also going to be regulated by the Federal Reserve. So we're taking something that people liked, but that still could be tracked, and then we're applying U.S. law to it and the Federal Reserve to it. And so this applies, it's the same technology that's going to be used to tokenize the other assets, whether it's art or land or oil or whatever it happens to be. So this form of tokenization that they're rolling out, when you see Larry Fink, I have a clip from him on CNBC at Davos, and he says, "Oh, we're really excited about tokenization of stocks and bonds." Do you think that's because you're going to be able to, as the consumer, have the tokens in your own possession? Why would he be excited about that? They're taking technology that should be decentralized and doing the reverse. They're centralizing it. And so in every instance that I've seen, and I study all the CBDC projects and I study all of the tokens, I've been working on tokenization of equities since 2018. And I could go talk about Patrick Byrne and a whole bunch of things, but we don't have time to go into this right now. And I will tell you what ultimately ended up happening was Wall Street shoved out all of the people that were actually promoting truly decentralized solutions that empower the individual in favor of technologies that allow multiple intermediaries. So what could have been a freedom system has turned into a digital prison.
Yeah, that's horrifying. Can you speak to like holochains and that technology? Because I know that there's a lot of discussion about how that's going to be more decentralized and more privatized, but a lot of the people who are advocating this are working with organizations like the UN. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
I haven't spent a lot of time on that one, but I do know that if you're working with the UN and you're working with these organizations, you've already lost the plot, because the intention of these organizations, none of these organizations have as a core value or first principle protecting privacy. It's actually not part of what they're doing. So you can actually see Lagarde from the EU ECB, or you can listen to Augustus Carstens, who's the head of the Bank of International Reserves, and they talk about the whole purpose of this is actually about surveillance. It is about surveillance. It's not about convenience. They go ahead and tell you that directly. So there are a lot of different technologies out there that may have the potential for being decentralized, but the way forward here is not going to be through adoption by multinational organizations or even governments. We need privacy technology that people are adopting at the individual level. So I don't expect Walmart to be adopting privacy tokens. I don't expect the existing incumbent players to actually move to these technologies, because they are part of the technocracy. They're trying to line up in advance and carve up the pie in this new system where under a technocracy, we'll end up with one global currency, and that currency will be backed by energy credits. And so all of these large multinational corporations are already working with MasterCard and working with other organizations and going out and buying, land to conserve forests, which is just another way of getting ahead of the curve on carbon credits. And so this is going to be about small businesses and individuals adopting alternative technology, not trying to take a technology and think naively that these technocratically based organizations are going to adopt something decentralized and private. There's no evidence to support that whatsoever.
Yeah, no, there's very much evidence to support the opposite. And just to emphasize that, the Technocracy Inc. in their own magazine, they described the definition of technocracy in 1937, Technocrat magazine. They said the definition was social engineering, and then they go on to say that the purpose of surveillance and data collection is to control. So they're pretty explicit about that, and the people who are running these NGO type organizations are technocratically minded, as you had mentioned. And they're people who are carrying on this legacy and the ideology. Although what I see happening now is incredibly, I find it's even more concerning, because now they have a lot of this, like they've got the spiritual, religious kind of ethos that's been merged with this technocratic agenda. And of course, the political as well. And I'm seeing that with Elon now. He's starting his new party, his American Party. Of course, it was being supported by people like Andrew Yang of the Forward Party. The slogan is not left, right, it's forward. And he is definitely a technocrat. And then, of course, he's consulting with Curtis Yarvin to start his new party. So it seems like they're using the political strategy of third way politics to consolidate the center, using the narrative of we're going beyond the two-party duopoly. Not to say that there's not flaws in the two-party system, but they're preying on that and preying on the fact that the public recognizes that, in order to usher people into what they call the radical center. And just to, let people know, when they say radical center, they're not talking about being moderate. They said it's always left of center, and it's going to be very progressive, which is what technocracy is. It's a very progressive philosophy that runs on, as you said, energy credits. And so this is a great way for them to usher in things like the UBI. So I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on that, like the UBI, the political system, and where we're headed with that, if this keeps going in the direction it looks like it is.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in for a second and just kind of add to that. Aaron had said something about energy credits, right? Mm-hmm. And so this week we saw a huge meeting take place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it was orchestrated by McCormick, right? Senator McCormick. And he brought in the whole crew, right? You name it. They had Exxon and Chevron and, Larry Fink and, what's his name? Karp of Palantir. I mean, you go down the list, it was just a huge, and so it was really this merging between energy and technology. It was front and center, just big as can be. Doug Burgum, who's our Secretary of Interior, was there, and he just came right out and said it. We ran a clip this week on the show, and your jaw almost drops to the ground. He said, look, here's the deal. This is about energy, turning that into electricity. So we'll take the energy however we can get it, whether it's nuclear, whether it's small nuclear reactors, whether it's natural gas, whether it's whatever it may be. We don't care. We're going to take this energy, we're going to turn it into electricity, and then we're going to turn that into intelligence, okay? And they talk about these big data centers. And so what they're talking about now is a 5 gigawatt spend into one data center, okay? Just to give you a reference point, what that means, Denver runs on 1 gigawatt. So we're talking about 5 times the energy used out of Denver going into one data center. I don't know what they're going to be doing in there, but this is really what Aaron's talking about too. This technology, the energy and the technology and the you can make the bridge pretty quickly to technocracy when you start thinking about that, because if they control that whole process. President Trump took a trip to the Middle East, right? Securing energy with Qatar and, Saudis and UAE, right? The United Arab Emirates. And we see all this stuff going on with Iran and Iraq and Syria, and Israel continues to bomb Syria as we speak, and so you see this whole corridor of energy coming into play. And you see the same thing going on. Everybody's fighting for, there's these firms. You watch I'm up trading a lot, so I catch a lot of these overnight news, and you'll see that they're fighting for the data centers in Japan now. And, all over the place. China, obviously China's going crazy with these, the NVIDIA chips this week. Jensen Huang went to China, straddled the fence. He's, speaking half English, half Chinese. We don't know where he's got his real foot, but he was so happy when he went to DC and got these H20 chips approved to be selling them in China again. So we can see this energy to electricity to intelligence. Okay. And it's really that trying to take this AI and turning it into this intelligence. And then you can you can just see tokenization all over that, right, Aaron? I mean, that's just got tokenization written. I mean, it just pick your point on that whole curve, and it's tokenization wherever you want it.
Yeah, Aaron.
It is all tokenized. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
It is all tokenization, but more than that, because I think the question, I think you were talking about kind of the political aspect of this, and I would say that if you look at America's Party, the first 2 items, I believe, they haven't laid out a full platform, but I believe the first 2 items were the application of AI to defense and then the application of AI to make government more efficient. There's nothing more technocratic than that. Those 2 points are pure technocracy. So America's Party be clear, is the Technocracy Party, but understand this also. The Technocrats have already won the 2028 election, and here's why. And certainly, Courtney, you've written more about this than anyone. But I mean, essentially, J.D. Vance is Peter Thiel's handpicked person who follows Yarvin and is himself a technocrat. He is the front runner for the 2028 election, and now you have America's Party, which is Musk. And he'll either promote Vance or he'll put up they'll make sure that we're going to have an election where you're selecting between technocrats. That's essentially kind of baked in to the equation. And the unfortunate thing is people have bought this division, this manufactured polarity. And so now we went from, Elon saying Western civilization will be completely destroyed unless we get this white knight team in, and then the white knight team won. And so then we ended up with Trump and Musk. And now the white knight team, rather than people sitting around and saying, hey, listen, maybe we should stop putting all of our eggs in these white knights. Maybe we should start reclaiming our free will, taking control of our own lives. Instead, now people are you on the Elon team or are you on the Trump team? And either way, we end up with technocracy.
Yes.
Well, and if I can add to that one quick thing, this week what we saw was this big battle, right, between Jerome Powell and President Trump. We also see this battle going on between is President Trump and, Pam Bondi going to release this Epstein stuff? And so they've isolated off a big chunk of the MAGA, faithfuls. And in that whole process, I wouldn't be surprised, Aaron, if it even takes till 2028. They may get to the point where it almost feels to me like Trump is self-destructing in certain ways. He could almost self-destruct and let Vance come in. You know what I mean? They could pull some kind of a deal where Vance comes in even before 2028. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for him to self-destruct even before 2028.
My theory on that, and I mean, this is just speculative. I don't have any inside goods on this, but I think that they're going to try and compile some sort of Epstein like bombshell that, incriminates Trump. And then they're going to start like impeachment discussions and try to get him out so they can usher in Vance. That's just a theory. I mean, I'm not, yeah, just
I have a theory, and this is a theory as well. I have a theory that after Trump's first term, Palantir and others dug up information on Trump, and I mean maybe he was leveraged even before winning re-election, and this was all coordinated to bring in JD Vance. That's also purely speculative, but if you look at it, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, and certainly with what Elon is doing with this, he's already stated in the early tweets that they're making the Epstein thing the basis of this. And so the original, when he put out that tweet saying, the reason they're not releasing the list is because Trump's on the list, save this tweet, so on and so forth, because obviously this is a very divisive issue. And so this is what he's doing to kind of gain momentum because, who's not going to be against Jeffrey Epstein? And so whether Trump is on the list or not, I don't know, but these technocrats are very sophisticated. This is a long range plan. I mean, this is the whole point behind this. The politicians don't control anything. They're just the puppets. And if you look at the history of what the PayPal mafia has been doing and Thiel and his behavior, I mean, these guys are willing to play the long game and they're willing to play outside of the box. And so this is a situation where, again, everything I just said, even what you said is speculative on Trump, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're setting something up where Vance comes in early. And the thing that a year ago when I was warning people about CBDCs, a lot of the MAGA people were very concerned about it. If it had a Klaus Schwab stamp on it, it's bad news and we don't want digital IDs. Now that Trump's in, we have Real ID and people are celebrating it, even though Real ID is digital already in 8 states. Yeah. We have Palantir doing a database of Americans. We have Doge giving an API to Palantir so that Palantir can bring in our tax information. And now we're about to pass a backdoor CBDC, all within the first 6-7 months of this administration, which, again, that's mind-boggling in terms of what that means for the movement and progression of technocracy in this country.
Yeah, and let's not forget the whole AI.gov, which actually really started under Trump in 2019. And then, of course, Biden advanced it. This goes to your point that the politicians are kind of just the puppets advancing the real agenda here, which is technocracy. And then there was that leak that it was supposed to launch July 4th, because nothing screams Independence Day like a digital gulag, But they didn't actually launch it. It still goes, it redirects to the whitehouse.gov .gov, but this agenda is clearly in the works because almost every state has a digital governance summit. I know in my state, they've already done it in May. We've got now Grok AI is doing Grok government. We've got ChatGPT's got a whole government portal. So these things are all well underway. The other component when you talk about Epstein is that, not to undermine the hardness of, all the scandals and the sex trafficking and pedophilia that, obviously that's attached to that narrative. But I think the bigger story is that a lot of this is about the transhuman agenda. So much of what Epstein was funding, like one of the more overt ones is Charles Lieber, but the list is just, it's infinite, it's seemingly, and his connections to Peter Thiel, right? Valar is one of the, well-known ones. I think he invested 40 million. Now it's worth like 170 million. So I think that's really a lot of the focus on Epstein is surrounding the trafficking rings. And I'm not undermining that that's terrible. And that obviously that should be, something should be done about that. But I think a lot of people aren't talking about the transhuman agenda, which is connected to technocracy. And that is largely what he was involved in. So if either of you have thoughts on any of that, chime in.
Well, yeah, to go back to your earlier point, RFK coming out and talking about wearables is incredibly disappointing because this actually speaks to, wearables are just another extension and loss of free will. So we keep on, and we're doing it voluntarily, although I would argue, do we actually have informed consent? But we're signing all these agreements, yep, online agreements and everything else, and we're giving away our data, and then we're moving away towards, wearables, and then the next is to have implants. Yep. Which of course Musk is already there, but I didn't necessarily expect RFK to be jumping into that agenda. And if you look at Casey Means or whatever, her main area is glucose monitors, yep, which actually emit EMF and increase your insulin levels. Yep. I mean, this is actually just ridiculous what's going on here. And so yeah, people are missing the point and moving away from what was Epstein all about. And I'll give you one other area that warrants a lot of exploration. And it's been getting some coverage now. I wrote an article last year about Jeffrey Epstein's involvement with Bitcoin. Jeffrey Epstein funded Joy Ito, who ran this MIT multimedia lab, as well as a private venture capital firm called Garage Ventures, and funded the changes to Bitcoin that pushed the narrative from Bitcoin being something you use for day-to-day transactions as a replacement for central banks to Bitcoin is now digital gold, and it's something that you never sell, never use. It's slow, expensive, it's trackable, and it's something that you buy through BlackRock. That narrative, cementing those technical changes, as well as at the same time, the same Joy Ito not only funded those changes, but he also funded all 3 U.S. retail CBDC pilots. And so I have a quote. There was an article from Decrypt magazine with Jeffrey Epstein talking about his views on Bitcoin and that it's a store of value, not a medium of exchange. And he happened to fund, and we don't know exactly what it was earmarked for, but he funded Joy Ito's private ventures as well as the work at MIT on digital currencies. And so no one's talking about that other than, I wrote the article and it's now circulating a year or so later, but as we're jumping into this Bitcoin strategic reserve, which is a horrible idea, people really need to start peeling back the onion and understanding the history of Bitcoin and how it's evolved, because it's not what people think it is. It's not freedom money.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you addressed that, because I would think more Bitcoin enthusiasts would be rallying against this, because it's the antithesis of everything they claimed that Bitcoin was going to be. So, yeah, and they don't seem to be. So I don't know if that they're just not aware, or if.
Well, the main person who's been speaking about this, Roger Ver, wrote a book called Hijacking Bitcoin, and I just got an update on this, but he's been stuck in Spain for well over a year, where he's facing extradition to the United States, and he's facing 109 years, which is essentially a life sentence. But he wrote a book called Hijacking Bitcoin. 3 weeks after that book was published, he was arrested. And so essentially he hasn't been able to bring that content forward at a very crucial time. So, he writes this book, and just 3 months later, there's the Bitcoin conference with Donald Trump and with RFK at the time and everybody else. And I don't think any of them have heard this other narrative either. And there are a lot of people with financial interests that want to make sure that Roger remains silenced. And I've experienced this firsthand because I know Roger, I've interviewed him, and I've been blocked by most of the major Bitcoin developers, but also people like Michael Saylor and Max Kaiser. They've all blocked me just for recommending that people read Roger's book.
Oh, that says quite a bit, doesn't it? So, do you have anything you want to chime in with, Craig, on that?
Well, not so much on that. The one of the things I did want to add is, just to add a little context to this in terms of the power and the change in the power of what's going on. It sort of fits to what Aaron's saying, who's in control, who's going to be in control of the data. And back to the database, Larry Ellison, this week, he just moved up to the second wealthiest guy in the world, right behind Elon Musk. Okay. And then we saw NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, move into the 9th place, surpassing Warren Buffett. So we're seeing this change of the guard, right? COVID kind of brought in this wealth and power transfer bigger than the world's ever seen. Typically in the past, wars were wealth and power transfers, that figured out by the Rothschilds and figured out by others before that. Yeah. But then we kind of go through this evolution of these series of, the Vietnamese and the South Korean, and we go through this whole process of wars. And now we're really in that 5th generation war. And if you really watch the money movement and how fast these technocrats are accumulating, because we used to call it the globalists, right? These globalists were behind the scenes, and now we're calling them the tech. Now where it's becoming very clear, it's not just a globalist anymore. Because I would have put Warren Buffett in the globalist camp, right? With his connections with Solomon Brothers back in the day, and in and out of that whole situation, I would have called him potentially a globalist, but it's not that anymore. I mean, he's losing the guard. He's getting older, of course, right? And retiring here soon. But you see this change taking place, this power and wealth transfer taking place. And it's very concerning because you just see these names that we know just continuing to move up this board where, there's a couple $1 trillion worth of just personal net worth, let alone the power that these corporations are starting to exert. And, you see these Stargate and these other things coming together where they're working together. You get, Masayoshi Son from Japan working with Larry Ellison, and they're welcomed into the Oval Office. And it's just like, okay, come on in. We're just looking for investment. And everybody thinks it's great, right? We're selling this thing called foreign direct investment. Where's the foreign direct investment going to go? It's coming to the U.S. We're the hottest. You heard this, right? We're the hottest country in the world now. We're the hottest country. So hopefully that plays into what you guys were talking about. I wanted to make sure we get that in there because it's not just us making this up. You see the money movement changing. You see the power changing. It's right before our eyes if we just take a quick little glimpse of what's going on.
Yeah. And I would just add to that the technocrats are globalists. They want planetary control. That is what they laid out, and that is their agenda. And what I find so deceptive about what's going on, particularly in the United States, is that because they use the manipulation of language, so they're marketing it to people who are quote unquote freedom minded, who might be more libertarian, hoping that they can capture people who might not have bought into the left right, slogans and marketing schemes, and they're hoping to frame it in such a way where they're anti-elite, they're anti-globalist, but really what they're doing is creating another funnel that will create just because once they can capture the United States, that's why in my Phoenix Conspiracy, I said that part of the reason they keep using this term democracy is, they really want to phoenix the republic because I think that they have to take down America for this agenda to work and for it to be a global technocracy. But it's also the West, and most of the West is under democracies. That's how they're run, the democratic government. But a lot of the East is already under more of a surveillance state or more acquiescent to surveillance state type of modality of government. So I think that that's part of what is, I just want to point out the deception of that, because I think that's very much what's underway. And I think it's why a lot of Americans are not aware of it or not, wise to it. So yeah. Do either of you have thoughts on that?
You want to go first?
Yeah.
I'll let Aaron go on that. I'll save my time for a few other things.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
It's not my thing. So.
Well, I would say as to deception, it's funny. I'm going to, on my podcast tonight at 8:00, I'm going to be one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is propaganda, and starting with Bernays in World War I, and then kind of tracking where it is now. Because when we talk about deception and we talk about a lack of informed consent, there's no area where that is more prevalent than social media. And Musk knows before he bought Twitter, I'm still trying to find the clip because he made some reference to social media being all about manipulating people's limbic systems, manipulating their emotions, their dopamine levels and everything else. He understands from first principles, at least from a Newtonian sense, what this is all about. And my own experience, so X is unfortunately still the primary platform that I use. And I post here all the time. And I've gone viral this week on 2 posts, and it's interesting what those posts are because they're not the kinds of posts that I would think would go viral. I got one that got 8.3 thousand likes, and it's society will collapse if they realize the files. I've got news for you. Society has already collapsed because of this kind of thinking. Well, that went viral, and that is not, I actually, I don't know how to prove it yet, but I suspect whatever the algorithms are, and I'd like to actually sit down and think about how to maybe test this. But I think Elon is already manipulating the algorithms in favor of his narrative around Epstein, his narrative around division, so that he can aggregate more power for the America's Party. And that is pure deception. And this is deception at a much more sophisticated level. I mean, this isn't just, well, we're going to try to plant this, subconsciously here. This is targeting at the individual level using very sophisticated techniques. So what I'm studying is, okay, we know what Bernays did. We know what Freud was doing, but it's not like they stopped. So what is the scientific basis for when they're sitting at Google and Facebook? What is the scientific basis that they're using to explicitly and intentionally manipulate our dopamine and intentionally manipulate our emotional states to push an agenda?
So, let me add to that because can I add to that, Courtney? So about a week or two, Aaron was on with me in the morning, and he was talking about Hulkamania, okay, and the Hulk, right? And so what I've noticed is, and maybe you guys have comments on this, right? So we've got President Trump, leader of the most powerful country in the world, again, on as it's portrayed. And then we have Elon Musk, the wealthiest guy in the world, right? Everybody loves a championship match, right? Worldwide Wrestling Championship match. And then what do we get? We get Jerome Powell, the leader of the world's most powerful central bank. And you get President Trump again going at it. People can't resist that kind of stuff. They can't resist, even if like, I don't know if you remember this. Like I was at a track meet not that long ago, and I'm watching these pole vaulters setting state records, right? And I'm watching this other race, an 800 state record, and it's one after another. And people are sort of interested, but then all of a sudden a fight breaks out between 2 women, and people just flock like crazy over the rail, and they can't wait to watch this. Like, there's something in our limbic system that just wants to know who wins the fight. And so when you have 2 heavyweight titans or these heavyweight titans like this going at it, people can't resist. And what do? Everybody's looking up here like a magic trick while the Stablecoin Act, the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, all this stuff's being done underneath us. That's my take on it. I'd love to get your thoughts on that too. If you guys have any thoughts, if that makes sense, if that registers.
It does. So I have recently, and I'm in the process of making, I did not realize how long it was. So I'm in the process of making, so many people have asked me if I would make it into something that tangible, like a hard copy that people could purchase, a physical copy of, and I'm working on that. But I published on my Substack. It's called the Algorithmic Oracle, and it's really on this topic. And what I outlined was how we started out with this technique called sensitivity training. And it has military ties, it comes out of Kurt Lewin, Tavistock, Office of Naval Research. And, it's essentially brainwashing. And that's not me projecting. That's actually from the CIA.gov's own words. They said that they wanted to test the efficacy of it, but that they couldn't because it was too reminiscent of Chinese brainwashing. They didn't say Maoist struggle sessions, but that's essentially what they were alluding to. But then we had something called the Delphi method. And this was, in response to the Cold War, a way that they could measure the efficacy of technology in wartime. That's how it's couched, at least. And so they created something called this Delphi method, which is a more mechanistic version of sensitivity training. And now they have in-person meetings and polls and a lot of political events. They've merged the two. But what we're seeing today is something far more insidious. And that is the premise of this article, which I will put into a book, is that we have cybernetic algorithms that are using a combination of these, sensitivity training and Delphi method techniques that they have coded into these data mining through the algorithms. And now they are targeting, Aaron, as you said, individually. And it's based on, of course, it's always couched in, we want to make this, useful for you. So we want a feed that you want to interact with, or we want to want to show you ads for things that you actually want to buy. It's, of course, always couched as it's for our benefit, but they are using this also to program us, brainwash us, and also to silo us so that they can create these, Hegelian dialectic warring factions, because, as you said, people love a good sparring match. And there's a document from NATO, the cognitive warfare document, and they talk about this. They talk about how, social media preys on people's emotions, and heightened emotion, particularly anger, is really effective. And that because social media, the goal, they want to keep you on the platform. And so if they can get you angry, you're more likely to engage and be on there for longer. And of course, this is another way that they can manipulate us with propaganda. And, don't think that the intelligence agencies are impervious to that. And of course, a lot of them are tied to this agenda, this technocratic agenda. And we know that they're tied to it because that document, the NATO, it comes from NATO intelligence. So, yeah.
Well, they're doing it. If you go on anything, when I do any research on X and I go on there immediately, it's like, violence on the streets, people hitting people, little tiny Japanese guy crushing a 350-pound guy, right? It's all these things. It just, and it feeds, it's one after another after another. It's that whole process you're talking about. I mean, it's happening. There's no doubt.
In real time.
I see it in the markets too. Like these systems I just want to stress how sophisticated these systems are, because I've traded for 30 years and I've spent tons and tons of time watching these markets, and I've watched things evolve, early 2000s, after the 2008 real estate crisis. And I watched the sensitivity of these markets and how sophisticated, the models have gotten. And it is so sensitive. I can drop a little tiny order on the market and it will actually run, it'll just, start running away from you to try to get you to chase it, because it's, again, back to fear and greed, right? It's like, okay, I want to get into this trade, and they can pull the bids and offers away from you because they control all that. It's all a bunch of phony bids and offers around the market price. All of a sudden, the market starts to run away, and they want to get you to chase that because they think you're going to fall for it, And it's been going on, and you can see this getting more and more sophisticated all the time. The problem is it's really algorithm fighting algorithm, because there aren't that many human beings left trading the markets, really. It's maybe in the crypto space, there's still a fair amount of people, trading the crypto markets, but a lot of it's algorithmic. I don't know if you've tracked any of that yourself too, Aaron, the algorithmic side of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's crypto is in many ways maybe more rigged and manipulated than even the traditional markets. Although if you look at traditional markets, they're mostly owned by most of these financial instruments are owned by third parties that actually vote all the shares and drive all the volume. But crypto is even worse than that. I mean, as one example, we won't get too much into the technical weeds, but Tether, which is the most popular stable coin, they've never passed an audit. And in fact, twice, once by the state of New York and once by the CFTC, they were found guilty of basically not having the reserves to back their stable coin. So one Tether equals $1. And so presumably there are assets backing that, where if you exchanged your Tether, you would be able to get something in exchange, whether it's $1 or a treasury or Bitcoin or gold or whatever. And Tether historically, still to this day, $150 billion market cap, has never passed an audit. In 2017, Bitcoin had it's been going up, on and off for a long time, but it had the real spike that captured a lot of people's attention and got it to the forefront, which, by the way, aligned with the hijacking of Bitcoin and this whole Epstein narrative. There was a study done in 2017 by a university in Texas that said that up to 70% of the appreciation of the price of Bitcoin could be tied to the printing of Tether. So imagine this scenario where you have people printing out of thin air backed by nothing. And that's what's been causing the price appreciation of Bitcoin, which is what's launched this entire massive movement into crypto. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's bad.
Let me notch it up one more. So I've been trading the euro currency for a long time. The euro currency is kind of this, machination that came out of, we had the dollar, then they put together this euro and they assembled this euro, right? And UK joined the European Union, but they never brought their currency in, right? And then they defected with Brexit, a few years back. And fortunately, they never joined the currency because it would be impossible to separate yourself from the EU if you had joined currencies. We just saw Bulgaria come into the European Union. But here's what I want to say is I've been trading this euro for a long time because I know the whole thing's a house of cards. I mean, it's a currency without connected to a debt market, right? And the world's awash in debt. So it's a total farce. And so if you do the old thing you learn in statistics, right? You take a coin that's unweighted, right? A fair coin, and you flip it 1,000 times. The odds of getting 700 to 300 is almost zero, right? You're going to get 500. You're going to be real close to 500 heads, 500 tails. Not in the euro. You can watch these economic data. They come out, the economic data comes out, and it's probably, if there's been 300 events, it's probably like 285 in the favor of, the globalists and the technocracy, and about 15 the other